Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, April 11, Tuesday, for our webinar on EV charging at multifamily housing and workplaces. We have a great discussion for you today. Our speakers will discuss programs advancing workplace charging and multifamily housing. I am Simbiat Yusuf Mueller. I am the events manager at Fourth. But before I pass it along, to our moderator, Cassie Powers, Senior Managing Director at NASEO, the National Association of State Energy Officials. We have a few updates from the FORT team. Attendees, we ask that you submit all of your questions via the attendee chat during the webinar. We will have some time for Q&As after the presentation. We will also be sharing the webinar presentation as well as the recording with you with additional resources in our webinar recap shortly after the webinar. And for some people that are joining us for the first time, we always like to start with an introduction. Who we are Fourth. We are on a mission to electrify transportation. We bring people together and we create solutions that reduce pollutions and barriers to access of clean transportation. Our work is done in five main focus areas, which are access to electric cars, access to charging, access to emerging modes, events and partnerships, and policy. With all of these, we're hoping to advance equitable electric transportation. And the work we do would be possible without the support of our members and sponsors. We wanted to give a quick thank you to our sponsors for the webinars today, Onda and Idaho Power. Thank you for your support. But if you have any questions about membership at Fourth or sponsoring one of the webinars, we have one more this season before we announce the next season. You can reach out to my colleague, Rachel Avacamp. Her email is on screen right now, but it will also be in the webinar recap. And just over a month left, but we are 34 days until the Roadmap 2023 conference. And we have yet another video to showcase today. And I hope with that video, we've convinced you that you should be in Portland May 15th through the 17th next month and join us for great panels, great discussions, great networking opportunities. If you have any questions, there's still also opportunities to sponsor the conference. If you have any questions, you need additional information, or you're looking for where to register, you can find that information on the website at roadmapfort.org. And we also have another event that will be happening before the programming starts on 5/15, our workshop on wind federal funding for electric mobility in your community. The Fourth is convening diverse experts from across the electric mobility ecosystem to help communities make the best use of the various programs and funds, particularly competitive grant funds, to quickly and effectively drive electrification of personal transportation in ways that centers the needs of historical underserved communities. We hope you can join us for that as well. If you need any more information about the conference or the workshop, roadmapfort.org is the place to go. And with that, I am finally done with the introduction and I will pass it over to our moderator, Cassie.
Thanks so much and good day, everyone. And thank you to Forth for organizing this webinar and also to our sponsors, Honda and Idaho Power. We appreciate the support. My name is Cassie Powers with NASEO. We are the member organization for the governor designated energy offices in each of the states and territories. And we've been supporting our members roll out EV infrastructure and undertake EV planning initiatives for the better part of a decade. And I'm delighted to be here to facilitate this discussion on how to best support EV charging in multifamily dwelling units as well as at workplaces. And now we all know that the vast majority of charging, somewhere around 80 or 90%, takes place at home, which begs the question of how can those who live in multifamily dwellings who may not have access to a dedicated parking space charge their car? And then after charging at home, the second most popular place to charge is the workplace, meaning that investments at the office, at the place of work, is critical to enabling would-be EV drivers to make the transition and to buy an EV. Now, there's currently an unprecedented amount of federal incentives as well as support to help make investing in EV infrastructure as well as purchasing an EV easier than ever. There's a lot of news and attention right now on the NEVI program, the National EV Charging Infrastructure Program, which is providing $5 billion for fast charging along corridors, which is very important and needed to enable long distance travel and building a national EV network. But there's also funding that's going to be available for investing in chargers at home, at the workplace, and in the communities. And the $2.5 billion charging and fueling infrastructure grants through the U.S. Department of Transportation was rolled out just a couple of weeks ago. I believe a link is going to be dropped in the chat soon. This funding, half of it will go towards charging and fueling infrastructure grants along corridors, but then half of the funding is reserved for community charging. And that charging infrastructure can be placed just any place that's publicly accessible or at a multifamily dwelling or at a workplace. And so again, the first 700 million, I believe, of that is now available with the deadline for applications of May 30th. And so check that out if you're interested in learning more. There's a lot of other federal incentives currently available to support charging in multifamily homes as well as at the workplace. And we could probably talk about incentives all day long, but I do want to make sure we have plenty of time to walk through some of the best practices and kind of tips on how to engage building operators, owners, and others when you're interested in supporting EV charging in multifamily housing and at workplaces. So we have a terrific lineup of speakers from industry and from nonprofits who are going to share what they are doing to advance workplace charging as well as charging at multifamily homes. And so we'll have a bit of a level set at first to get everybody on the same page of what type of charging infrastructure we're talking about, for example, and then we'll dive into what some of the options are for supporting charging at multifamily homes and at the workplace. And so I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then you'll have a chance to hear from each of them over the course of the program. First is David Laderberg. He is the vice president at Smart Charge America. David has been completely immersed in the EV charging industry for 7 years and has sold and installed over 10,000 chargers all over the country. And he's also provided service and repair to thousands of chargers as well. Next up will be J.R. Anderson, program manager at Forth. JR serves as a manager for the Access to Cars team with a focus on consumer engagements. He was hired as one of the first salespeople for Tesla in 2009, and EVs continue to intrigue him. JR is passionate about sustainability, nature, and our planet. And then last but not least is Ben Mandel. Ben is the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at CALSTART, leading strategic planning efforts across the organization to develop scalable and transformative programs and partnerships. These efforts are aimed at enabling CALSTART to meet its ambitious 2030 objectives related to greenhouse gas emission reduction, air quality improvement, and quality of life enhancement. And Ben also oversees business development activities across the organization to strengthen partnerships with government agencies and foundations. So thank you all for joining us. And to get us started, I want for us to start with a little icebreaker. And so each of the panelists would like for you to answer this question. And I'm also going to ask everyone who's attending this webinar to feel free to type your answer in the chat. We want to get folks engaged and chatting on the chat. So the question for you all is, where do you charge most often and why? And I'll get us started by saying that my little Kia Niro, which we love, charges at our single family home outside of DC. And we plug into the 120 volt outlet just on the side of our house. I drive maybe 20 miles a day, works like a charm. So that is where I charge most. So we're going to go order of my screen. So JR, tell us where you charge and why.
Hi, everyone. I charge also at home. Have a single family home in Portland, Oregon. And my wife kind of complains because I have plugs everywhere. But I typically charge on 110 plug outlets as well, just trickle charge. And that seems to do the job every day, even though I do drive a bit more than 20 miles a day.
That's great. All right, Ben, how about you?
So currently, I have the fortune of using a charge point station in my home lot. I live in um, basically a townhouse kind of setting, and it's new construction. And as a dyed-in-the-wool advocate of electric transportation, I and a few other tenants, when we were moving in, were able to twist the developer's arm enough to install a dual port level 2 station. That's been such a blessing. Before that, I lived in Brooklyn, in New York City, and parked on the street and tried to compete with TNC drivers for use of basically one DC fast charge plug in the borough, which was not a very practical solution. So I'm very happy with this current situation.
So you have a lot of lived experiences to contribute to the discussion today. Fantastic. All right, and last but not least, David, where do you charge and why?
Yeah, so currently, just given what our nature of business is, I get the opportunity to charge at our workplace. So we do have workplace chargers. I do that quite a bit, but I also have two level 2 chargers at my home garage in the Austin, Texas area. So two EVs, and that's how we get around.
Fantastic. Well, and we're seeing lots of different types of answers in the chat. Some of you have free charging at work, which is fantastic. A lot of level 1 charging, and then a number of folks saying that it's difficult to find a charger because you live in a multifamily dwelling unit. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. So with that, let's get started. David, I'm going to turn it over to you to start us off. And so with that, David, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, my name is David Laderberg. I'm the Vice President at Smart Charge America. So next slide. So Smart Charge America, who are we? We are a company that since 2007 has been completely focused on the sale, installation, and service of electric car chargers. That's really our passion. We are a licensed electrical contractor, so certainly we know what we're doing and how to get just basically everything that you need in order to get it installed. So it's making sure everything happens from the beginning to end. When we look at it, there's next slide as far as the 5 Smart Charge America solutions. We find a lot of customers or developers or property ownership could be at various stages of the process. So what we do is we kind of approach it from different perspectives, whether it's just kind of design and consultation, which could be early, perhaps in a new development or new property, but also for a full turnkey. So we really do everything from beginning to end. To make sure that it's not only a good investment, it's installed properly, but also to make sure that it's protected correctly and the signage is done well and it's easy to find. And so there's a lot of bits and pieces to this that we have taken on, and to try to take it off, the kind of the burden on a property owner or a manager, just to ultimately make it easy. So as far as who do we work with? So next slide, who installs the Smart Charge America is really, we work with a lot. So a lot of the charger manufacturers out there rely on us, in addition to the automotive OEM manufacturers, and as well as whether it's Fortune 500 down to very small multifamily workplace locations. So we do quite a bit beyond just multifamily and workplace, but that's certainly where we do a significant amount of work. And certainly where a lot of the demand is in recent history. So as far as the next slide on why EV chargers, I think some people are pondering this still. So I always like to talk about this is where, at this point to question it, I think is, and of course I'm immersed in it all day. I think it's kind of foolish, but the reality is all automakers have now committed to transitioning to electric vehicles. They've divested the engineering teams focused on internal combustion. So that's really at the end of its development life cycle, and they're just kind of playing out what they have. So I think signs from whether it's government or manufacturers or engineers have already really made the decision. So it's kind of getting everyone else, whether in this case property ownership and the management companies, to really get on board. So you're just not going to be able to get these what I call legacy fueled vehicles coming up shortly. So, we get to the next slide on EV drivers, need charging at home and work, because reality is the best way to describe it is that, it's like your phone. You get home, you plug it in, or if you get to work, oftentimes you plug it in. So it's really the same idea. There's a lot of different stats out there I've seen, but in my experience, 80% of the time, it's really the easiest is just at home. You just know it's there. What I like to do is just, some people ask, how often do I plug in? I just say plug in all the time. Any opportunity you get to plug in, I always like that. I never like to, I rather need it and not have it than have it and not need it, or rather, but it doesn't take too much to do it. And I think, just doing it properly is very key and consistently. And now, the need is there, but we look at the next slide where right to charge laws are now popping up, where it actually absolutely requires it for ownership or management companies to make it available. This, certainly when it comes to multifamily, a right to charge is becoming more pervasive, in that it really requires that the property make it easy and available for an individual owner or lessor to be able to access or install EV chargers, right? So that's something that you're really going to have to do it no matter what. So doing it proactively is you're better off than getting your arm twisted. So I always encourage property ownership and management companies to take it on, because it's only a matter of time until all the states get on board. So now we get to the next slide, where EV drivers, they have a need for charging speed. And what is that? So first we have the level 1, which is, it was already commented earlier, it's kind of that regular household outlet. But you're only looking about 4 or 5 miles of range per hour. So it's really good if it's very little driving and it's not really a shared outlet most often. And then we get to level 2, where we're looking at where it's 16 to 25 miles of range per hour. So it's 200 volt or 240 volts. That's the most common. And then, you always see instances where DC fast chargers are being discussed, and that's really long range driving. So that's situations where it's a long trip, which, the price on that is very much a different level, which, when we're talking workplace and multifamily, level 2 is where, the sweet spot is. So that is what is, a good fit in this situation. So the next slide on considerations for your program, it's about looking at community chargers, or is it okay to have individual chargers? I am seeing leases out there where the lessor is negotiating to have EV chargers installed as part of the contract, right? And so that could be dedicated spots in this case, but it's really best for you to decide as a property owner or manager to do it ahead of time, so it makes it easier. So then having a fee, how's it going to be used? How's notifications going to be done? Know whether workplace or multifamily, leaser really wants to be able to have to walk outside to figure out if the charger is available. So having that figured out, it definitely makes sense. So that goes to the next slide on sensible, scalable charging policies. It's really planning for all, not just for the few. And that's where I've seen a lot of people make mistakes in the past, is they just maybe have 1 or 2 EV drivers. They don't think it's going to take off. And so they create really a lopsided policy or a process for them. And, of course, a bunch of other people jump in, and it's just really not set up for multiple people or multiple situations, and it gets painful. So it's about making sure it's equitable, it's accessible, and also optimized for future growth, which is incredibly important, easier said than done. So, the next slide where I talk about the solution is really smart chargers, where it gives people the opportunity to have something that is equitable access and controlled access, like authenticating drivers, very accurate measuring of electricity usage, and then people pay for what they use, right? So no one else is having to foot the bill for someone else's charging. That certainly isn't fair, and I see that in some cases. So that's the next slide, is on the energy managed solution, which is having that built in is important. So then, you look at something that is intelligently managing that, because one of the difficult parts about this is, it is a fueling infrastructure, and there's a finite amount of electrical capacity for any given building. And when you hit the maximum of that, you're really stuck. So it's about managing that in a very efficient way and distributing it to those that need charging, and that it really takes a smart charging system to be able to do that and very intelligently use that electricity. Because the reality is, when people are plugged in, they're not always charging, right? And that's just the reality of when you're charging. You plug in, it'll charge for as much as it needs, and then it stops. And then next you got that kind of downtime in between. And so using that electricity, and then rather than locking it down for those that are not needing it, So that's it really requires a smart charging solution. So if you go to the next slide on solution for personal charging, this is a situation where we have that individual. So it's just one example. There are certainly plenty of products out there that we represent, and that this is really for that dedicated spot situation where you have control over it. No one's randomly using it or getting access to it, and also allows for the individual that does use it to basically get to only pay for what their usage is. So it does definitely makes it more equitable. And then the next slide on community charging, that is it's just an example. In this case, the CT4000 by ChargePoints. It's kind of a pretty common one out there you might see. And this is one that it allows people to take turns, essentially. And then it has a portion that the property takes care of on their end. And it just makes it simpler to manage. And certainly, it's kind of got the looks and appeal, and it's accessible and easily found as well. Next slide on how to add the electrical infrastructure, because once we pick the charger, the next part of this is really figuring out, where are we going to get the electricity from? Because it's not often that the electricity that we need to access those electrical panels is right where we want to put the chargers. So we got to put kind of some pen to paper, really think about this, and we like to work with people closely on this because it does take planning. If we have another electrician outside of us working on this, things can get crossed pretty quick and make it difficult for us and for them. So that's where we have a step process. On the next slide on going to step 3, 4, 5, you can see where we even work with the engineering services. It is important to design this correctly and safely, right, to make sure that we're not overdrawing on the electrical capacity or overutilizing resources to make sure it's going to be good for the long term. And then ultimately look at the installation of the actual chargers as well to make sure that's going to be, and I have some examples there of pricing. So that's it is a step-by-step process. It is important to do it in a measured approach. That's what we do. So that last slide, you can see my name again. It's David Laderberg, with Vice President of Smart Charge America. You can go to our website if you'd like and do a little more research. And we're certainly happy to talk to you if you have more questions on your specific situation.
Thanks so much, David. And I see that folks are already putting questions in the chat, which is fantastic. We'll get to the questions at the end of the presentations, but feel free to keep dumping them in there. We're keeping a list of them, and we'll be able to get back to as many as we can by the end of the webinar. And so with that, we're going to turn it over to JR, who's going to share a little bit about the perspective from Oregon, things that are happening in one particular state that might be able to be applied elsewhere. So JR, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is J.R. Anderson, and I'm a program manager at Forth here in Portland. One of my primary roles is to educate, organize outreach efforts, and also provide technical assistance for ODOT's Community Charging Rebates Program, ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation. So today, I'm here to introduce the Oregon Department of Transportation Community Charging Rebate Program to you. So if you are a business owner in the state of Oregon or a multifamily property owner in the state of Oregon, this would apply to you. So this is a good example of something that is actively going on now. It will the first round will launch in June of this year, and they're going to do it in rounds. So if you have any questions, feel free to follow up with us. There'll be an email address at the end of my presentation. Okay, so this program is well supported, meaning that both Forth and ODOT are working together to help applicants with the questions. So when we have questions that stump us, we send it to the ODOT team, and if they need to look into it a little further, they go ahead and they'll get back to us with an answer. So feel free to ask any questions you have. So right now we're announcing a soft launch of the program, and keep in mind that there are aspects of this program that are subject to change. But in this presentation, you'll get a brief overview of the necessary information and the key pieces of the program. As we near the launch date in June of 2023, these sessions will become more detailed and technical. So we are currently doing information sessions twice a month. And that's what we're referring to here. So twice a month, we're putting on information sessions webinars that will answer any questions and provide this information and try to get the message out. And as we get closer to the launch date, we'll do a technical assistance session where we'll actually go through the application. So as you know, electric vehicles are crucial to lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. And with the increasing demand for electric vehicles, charging infrastructure is crucial. So ODOT would like to use this rebate to benefit projects that are located in priority communities to fill the gaps in charging infrastructure throughout the state. Targeting priority communities is a key element of the program, and priority communities are defined as rural and disadvantaged. The intention of this is to give these communities a head start for the next EV wave. So EV drivers are often parked for longer periods of time while they charge, which is why the program looks to place stations within business areas and shopping districts where people can stay to eat, explore, or shop. Before we dive deeper, just want to go into a little bit, as I think David talked about this a little bit, but just kind of go into it a little bit more. Level 1 chargers, common outlet where you plug in your cell phone, plug in your computer, your microwave, your laptop. It's a standard plug, and that's typically what I use to charge my cars. Although if I need more charger, we do have a level 2 at the house as well. So a level 1 will give you about 2 to 5 miles per hour of charge, and a level 2 will give you about 30 miles on average. I think I've seen it as high as 52 miles, depending on your level of amperage in your that's powering the outlet. Level 2 plug is basically like a dryer outlet plug. So that'll kind of give you the best example of that the type of power that those level 2 chargers are demanding. Okay, so this program is intended to help reduce the cost of purchasing, installing, and maintaining EV charging for applicants and to place EV chargers in strategic locations. The rebates for this program are $4,250 to $5,500 or up to 75% of the eligible costs. We'll go over that more in further slides, but that's just the basics. The program will launch this June. And close once funds are fully reserved, or in August, whichever comes first. ODOT will be separating the funds into 2 buckets, 30% for non-priority communities and 70% for priority communities. The rebates will be reserved on a first-come, first-served basis within each category. Overall, there is $1.75 million available for round 1 funding, and again, they're going to be doing this in rounds. Priority communities are defined as disadvantaged and rural communities. A single entity cannot claim more than $150,000 in rebates per round. So here are the rebate funding amounts broken down in greater detail. So in the first row, the level 2 chargers are considered public parking will receive $4,250 per port, or up to 75% of eligible costs. Multifamily housing level 2 charges will receive $5,500 per port, or up to 75% of eligible costs. Multifamily housing can also receive a $750 rebate for the installation of a level 1 charger, which is basically a standard outlet. ODOT also recommends installing a level 1 charger in conjunction with a level 2 charger, as level 1 chargers take longer to charge. I want to note that there's a minimum of 2 chargers that must be installed, and there's a maximum of 8 chargers that are eligible for the rebate. So here's a sneak peek of an interactive map that applicants will be able to use in the near future. I think by the end of this month, they're planning to launch it. Basically, you'll be able to type in your project site location, and the map will generate an answer as to whether you're eligible for as a disadvantaged community or a rural community. A good majority of Oregon would fall into that into those categories. To apply for the program, eligible applicants must be a business, nonprofit, organization, or a state, local, or tribal government entity. They must also be the site owner of a site owner or the authorized agent with a site agreement form. So here are some examples of ideal site locations. If you would like to see more extensive list, the ideal site host location document is on the Community Charging Rebate Program website. The goal is to place chargers in public areas where people will spend time visiting while their cars are charging. So 2 eligible locations are publicly accessible parking sites and multifamily housing. Some examples of publicly accessible parking includes tourist locations, retail stores, transit stations, and more. And for multifamily housing, some examples include apartment buildings, townhouses, and condos. Some costs that will be eligible under the CCR rebate are charging equipment and installation, including labor and materials, engineering design costs, electric service upgrades, project signage, site lighting, network agreement costs, and maintenance contracts. So it's pretty thorough. There's 2 ways to apply. There's a pre-installation flow, which we'll go over this more, but basically you gather all of the necessary documentations. You send it to ODOT. They'll send it back to you if you need anything, if you're missing anything. Once it's corrected and ODOT reviews the application, they'll reserve the funding for you. Then you have 270 days to install and submit the post-installation portion. The post-installation is reviewed, and if all the information is correct, a payment will be dispersed. Post-installation will be if you're submitting a project after you install the charging equipment yourself. You must submit an application within 90 days of the project's installation date. Installation must also occur after the program launch. Also has to go through the review process, but if it's approved, then you can receive payment. Coming soon, there's a lot of things coming soon. So frequently asked questions we have now, we can provide that for people who are interested. Please just email us and let us know. Interactive map that we spoke about, and a list of chargers. Right now, they're currently using PGE and Pacific Power approved chargers list, but they're coming up with their own charger list as well for the qualified rebate. If you have any questions in the presentation we're not able to get to, please email us at the email addresses shown on the screen. You can also visit the CCR website or get updates on the 4th and ODOT social media pages. Thank you.
Thanks so much, JR. Very helpful. And we had a number of questions about the design of Oregon's program. And so we'll get to those after our next presenter. But with that, let me turn it over to Ben, who will share a little bit of what's going on at CALSTART. And Ben, take it away.
Thank you so much, Cassie. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are, everyone. Thank you to Fourth very much for convening this session and for inviting CALSTART and me to participate. And thank you to you, Cassie, for moderating. My name is Ben Mandel, and I'm a Vice President of Strategic Initiatives at CALSTART. For those who are not familiar with CALSTART, we're a national clean transportation nonprofit that works with our member network of currently more than 350 organizations across the country and across the world to accelerate the deployment and commercialization of clean and equitable transportation solutions. CALSTART was incorporated in 1992 and has regional offices in Michigan, in New York, where I'm located, as well as California's San Joaquin Valley, in addition to our Pasadena, California headquarters. Along with Fourth, as well as the Columbia Willamette Clean Cities, we were one of the prime contractors to the U.S. Department of Energy for a national workplace charging campaign. We've partnered with the Fourth team to create and launch a new umbrella brand called Charge at Work. You're soon going to be seeing much more about this very ambitious new campaign, but today I'm very pleased to share with you some previews. Over the next few minutes, I'll cover why we care about workplace charging, what it looks like in practice, how we're promoting it through Charge at Work, as well as how you can get involved. There's no denying that EVs are on the rise, and this has already been covered in part by the prior speakers. EV registrations in the US rose 60% in the first quarter of last year, even as the overall market declined by nearly 20%. And in recent months, roughly 7% of new car registrations nationally have been electric. This is actually pretty good, right? But we still have a lot of ground to make up in light of commitments by several states to achieve 100% zero emission car sales by 2035. And while it feels like we see EVs from Tesla and Chevy and Ford and Volkswagen, Hyundai, Kia, and more all around us in some locations, the fact of the matter is that we're still in the infancy of this transition, really still in the early adopter stage. But EV adoption is similar to many other high-tech products in terms of adoption phenomena. Author Jeffrey Moore characterizes tech adoption in the buckets shown on this slide. This paradigm shows a chasm between the early stages, so enthusiasts and early adopters, and the rest of the mass market. And this describes very elegantly why so many high-tech products seem to make a sensational entrance, but then kind of peter out before they're refined enough to become practical. So for EVs, where we're at about 7% nationally, we're very much still in the early adopter phase. And we'll need much more effective and wide-ranging suite of charging solutions to bridge this gap before we can convince pragmatists and even those who are more conservative in adoption behavior that EVs can in fact be a practical solution. In order for EVs to be seen as broadly viable beyond early adopters, an abundance of charging stations in 3 contexts is critical, and that's namely where people live, work, and play. Early adopters in single-family homes, as Cassie mentioned up top, are going to install their own charging at home. That's going to meet most of their needs. However, we won't reach mass market drivers and multifamily dwelling residents, which constitutes about 30% of the national housing market, without a more holistic combination of additional charging approaches. So adding charging to the workplace has already become an increasingly critical element in the car fueling ecosystem of the future. Workplace charging is also an important strategy at the more macro level. We tend to think of overnight home charging as the most grid-friendly charging method currently. However, as we move toward mass market EV adoption and shift to an increasingly renewable powered electricity grid, daytime charging at work will be the more efficient pathway. Charging at work during daytime hours will necessitate less investment in new generation capacity or energy storage, and it'll also help to sop up excess generation from abundant daytime solar energy and reduce the waste of this carbon-free electricity as states are bringing more and more renewable energy online. Now, workplace charging does not need to be a huge project. Several years ago, CalSTART ran a workplace charging incentive program called Charge to Work New York, which was funded by New York State, NYSERDA. One of our participants in that program was the Cary Institute of Ecosystem Studies, which installed 4 charging ports through our program as part of their commitment to go 100% fossil-free. In this instance, we were able to provide financial and technical assistance for this project to move forward, and now there is a wealth of assistance available for other businesses to do the same. Charge at Work is the latest national workplace charging influence, implementation, and recognition campaign. And again, it's being funded by the US Department of Energy. Through this program, we want to transform workplace charging from an employee benefit or amenity to the norm. And we will serve, along with our partners, as a national workplace charging concierge to bring about this outcome. Our objectives with this program are severalfold. We want to accelerate EV adoption by making the office a reliable charging point, expand the benefits of electric drive deeper into disadvantaged communities, and lastly, to engender a self-sustaining ecosystem in which EV charging is a default part of the employee experience even after the grant ends. Our goals for this program in terms of quantified targets are pretty lofty. 1,000 participating employers with an emphasis on large employers that have many locations across the country, 200 public officials endorsing our workplace charging pledge and encouraging their constituent employers to lead through adoption of workplace charging, and 100,000 workplace charging ports installed across the country as a result of Charge at Work commitments. For CalStart's portion of the Charge at Work campaign, we'll work with our implementation partners to push past known barriers to make planning and executing workplace charging projects simpler. For one, the charging market is currently fragmented. It's not always clear whose responsibility it should be to provide charging access to drivers. So, working with elected leaders, Charge at Work will energize and empower employers to take responsibility for making the office a natural charging location. Second, workplace charging entails non-trivial costs. We need to be realistic about this. However, our implementation portal will connect the dots to make these projects less capital intensive. First, by connecting employers to applicable state or utility incentives, and secondly, by highlighting various flexible charger business models, including charging as a service and lease-to-own models that don't saddle the prospective site host with all of the costs up front. Finally, installation can add opaque costs and complexity to a project. Our implementation portal will connect employers to no-cost site assessments done by qualified local installers, and these site assessments will help to orient employers on where and how to install chargers most cost efficiently and provide cost transparency to get the project from commitment to completion. Charge at Work will launch publicly this fall, but we're already in the stage of gathering our early workplace charging champions. We would love for your businesses to join our program, and shortly we'll have a non-binding Charge at Work pledge available for businesses and public officials to review and sign. In the meantime, I want to encourage folks to visit our website, chargeatwork.org, and you can sign up there now to receive updates. And then before long at that site, we'll have supportive resources to help businesses to navigate this process and to empower employees to advocate for workplace charging at their place of work. We'll be looking for exemplary businesses to host community ride-in drives, and then we'll also look to recognize EV-friendly businesses through Forth's EV Adoption Leadership Certification Program. So again, please do visit us at chargeatwork.org and connect with my colleagues, Jason and Joe Plummer, who are running point on this for us. Please do sign up for updates and feel free to reach out to any of us. I'll also drop my own contact information in the chat, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks so much, Ben. Very helpful. I'd like to invite JR and Dave to also come on screen if you'd like, so that we can begin the Q&A. We have about a dozen questions that we'd like to get through in the chat. And so we have a number of questions related to just approach and options for property owners or multifamily dwelling units that are interested in installing workplace chargers, some questions on level 1, and then a number of questions about Oregon's program. So let's start with the first big bucket. And so I think for our panelists, do customers have a choice of chargers and or charging networks? Ben or Dave, would you like to take this?
Yeah, I could. This is David Laderberg. I can talk on that. So there are quite a few different charging networks out there, and that does create some confusion. I think not only for a new potential site hosts for chargers, but also new EV owners. There is some kind of talk about interoperability to make it easy, so you don't have to sign up, for instance, for like 5 or 6 different accounts for different networks, so to speak. But ultimately, what I try to help people do is, one, you can find one that is the easiest to find or the most common network. When it comes to workplace, I don't think that's necessarily as important as compared to if I were a retail spot where I would want, people that might not normally frequent my business to come or find me via charging. This case, workplace, they've already signed a 5 or 10-year lease, right? So that, from that perspective, it's more about the ease of use on a day-to-day basis that I focus on. So, again, there's a lot of different networks, yes, and there's different capabilities and aspects of each, but it really depends on the use case. But, I think workplace and multifamily tend to have more options in general. So at least that's my perspective on the question.
Thanks, David. Could you also talk a little bit about who maintains the chargers? We've seen that particularly at free community chargers, this can be a little bit of an issue, can lead to some downtime chargers, et cetera. So if you could share a little bit about maintenance options for chargers.
Yeah, that is a difficult thing because so much focus and input is done on the front end of just making the selection, the installation, and then we get it installed, we get it activated, it's being used, and then something goes wrong, whether it's a misuse, abuse, or vandalism, or just some things break, nothing lasts forever, and it's about having the proper budget for the long-term maintenance of the asset, because now as a part of your asset portfolio as a property owner, it is important to designate a certain amount of part of the budget that's going to maintain these chargers. So we do offer service, and so that's sometimes the manufacturer of the charger offers certain elements of kind of a service program, but I find them to fall short of a true kind of all-encompassing. We do offer that as a service to our customers if they like to add that on, where it can even involve preventative maintenance, which I think is important because sometimes, even a network connected charger could be inaccessible, but it wouldn't appear that way necessarily, unless you're really putting eyes on it and checking it on a regular basis, and or looking at it from a preventative, proactive approach, where winter's coming up. We want to make sure the cable management device, for instance, is working and operating correctly, because that's one of those things that in different temperature fluctuations can have kind of points of failure, right? So there's kind of small things out there people don't think about that we just do this all day long that we help them with. And it's about having the right budget, I'd say, number one, and expectation that, yeah, things can break, they will, and make sure that you're ready to handle it in a timely manner, because people will rely on these chargers, so they'll expect them to be accessible.
Thanks. And I guess on this notion of uptime, is there anything that can be done to proactively minimize the amount of time that these chargers are down? I know there's lots of options for response, but what can be done on the front end?
I can take
Yeah, I
that,
mean, so
Kathy.
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, just to jump in, I think it's interesting to consider the impact on the front end and the consumer decision about the business model or the revenue model for the charging companies. In the traditional kind of direct sale model, there can be a disconnect at times, and of course, those companies are still going to have um, reputation on the line, and have the imperative for good customer service to dispatch repair and help a customer. But there are other emerging models like charging as a service, owner operator, lease to own, where it becomes more performance based as payments go. And so what this can do is actually align the companies, the vendors' profit or revenue motive with uptime. And so I think that's an under focused potential area of interest for customers who are interested not just in performance of the unit, but also reliability, and maybe looking at a different allocation of costs over the lifetime of the project, shifting more from capex to opex.
Thanks. And David, do you have anything to add?
I think, yeah, that's a very good point brought up. The only other challenge is, it's easy to see chargers that are out, or certainly get frustrated quickly from the end user standpoint or even operator. And some of the challenges that I see out there are involved parts, where sometimes these parts can be difficult to get and or have long lead times. So I think a lot of people say that, they're purposely not fixing something. All I say is give them a little more understanding of realizing, yeah, some of these parts are difficult to get. They have long lead times, and that we try to keep them in stock the best we can. But just realize that, know that, and or I try to point people towards chargers that do have parts that are in stock and accessible to make that easier and get them back up and running more quickly.
Thanks. On that, also, given the Build America, Buy America requirements from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and some of the federal funding that's available, like the charging and fueling infrastructure grants that could support charging at multifamily housing as well as workplaces, do you anticipate that leading to a longer lead time for these projects? And for example, will it take a little bit longer to install the charging stations that are awarded under these grants due to those requirements?
I expect it to help. I do, and I'm already seeing elements of that helping it. So it does have parts that are in stock stateside. I have had challenges where some, if a charger is manufactured on another continent, that just the lead time for freight can be very, very challenging. So yes, having it stateside, I believe, will help this as a challenge.
Great. Well, I wanted to shift to some of the questions around level one. And so for the panelists, do you all see a best application for level one charging? And what are your thoughts on the use of level one charging for workplace charging with long dwell times to reduce electrical infrastructure costs?
So I think the level one charging is the challenge there first is that anyone can plug in, right? So for you to know who's plugging in and when, that can be challenging. So in other words, that you might set up just $5 a month or $20 a month or whatever you decide, but you're not the person that uses that the most won't necessarily be paying for what they utilize, and someone might not go to the office as much or wherever it's going to be. And so from a tracking model and off kind of a access control, authentication, it simply doesn't exist on a level one. It's just not there. But from lowering the infrastructure costs, you could make that argument, yes, but ultimately it's not very efficient. The dwell time is really what I look at first. What is the dwell time? How long is someone going to be in that spot? Because no matter what the electrical infrastructure does, it can be costly. Too, because the National Electric Code does have very specific requirements for EV charging, and those things, those aspects, honestly aren't adhered to as strictly as I'd expect them to, and that something we know very well. But even a very good electrician that doesn't do this all day long could not quite fully understand the repercussions of also the EV not necessarily having the highest quality of charge and or consistency. So with level two, that I find there's better results, not only for the user themselves being able to replenish quickly, but kind of long-term usage as well. Sorry.
Gotcha. And as a follow-up to that, you mentioned that it's really hard to kind of track who's charging for what and how much to charge, et cetera. But are there any commercially available options for tracking and managing level one charging at work?
I've seen some products out there, but again, you kind of give up the energy management and just good, accurate, kind of control. So again, there are some options out there, but honestly, personally, I couldn't speak too detailed on them, except for I know they're out there only because I just haven't seen them very often utilized.
I do know of
Thank you.
one. I do know of one that works on level one chargers. It's a company called, I believe it's called Orange Charging, and basically it's an adapter that goes right onto your dual plug 110 outlet, and it allows you to access the charging information, also the I'm assuming I think you have some power to maybe like end charging sessions and stuff like that. It's just basically a square device that goes on to the outlet. So I just learned about it recently, but it seems like pretty interesting. It's very exciting that a lot of these technologies are coming up now that we'll be able to have more control over these things.
Definitely. Now, JR, we have a few questions for you about Oregon's program. And so how did you land at the 5,500 cap for multi-unit? And what percentage of typical cost to install a multi-unit charger does that typically cover?
Great question. I mean, I think ODOT basically set the numbers for how much the rebate was going to be for. So multifamilies, I guess they're assuming that multifamily property owners may have to do a little bit more infrastructure development to get the power to the charging stations. So that's why they do that. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
Second part was what percentage of project cost is that expected to cover at a typical multifamily dwelling unit installation?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of variability with that question, and it depends on the property itself. It depends on the level of electrical infrastructure set up in that property. So I've heard numbers as low as, let's say, $2,000 and as high as $10,000, $12,000. So it just depends on your particular situation. I do know that some of the utility companies are offering free technical assistance right now. So I know Pacific Power is offering this, and I believe PGE as well, where they'll send someone to inspect your property and give you free technical assistance. It might be worthwhile having your electrician there as well, just so that they can learn and help you set up the infrastructure properly, so you get what you need.
Great. And then final question, JR, is what criteria is ODOT using for defining disadvantaged community?
Yeah, so some of that has been, I think it's mostly, whether they're talking about rural areas or areas that are underserved, which is a good portion of the Oregon, all the properties in Oregon, even outside of Portland, but even areas within Portland will even fall into that area, into those categories. So yeah, I mean, what I would say is, I think people should definitely apply and see if they fit, and I feel like it's more about having publicly accessible charging. And I think some of these things are kind of they're willing to make changes as necessary. So if they get a large percentage of people who are interested in putting charging stations in, they're going to take that into consideration, and maybe not for the first round, but maybe they will be available for the second round. I'm just assuming that's what's going to happen.
Got it. Thank you. Well, we've got one final question for all of our panelists. And so, David, JR, and Ben, if you could just leave one sentence with our attendees, what would you like to leave them with today? And we'll start with Ben.
Good prompt. I would say workplace charging is going to become the norm, so get involved now.
Great. And JR?
I will say that this effort will take a lot of energy from different angles in order for this to accomplish the goal, which is basically to make charging as seamless as possible, so that we can live the lives that we're accustomed to, and travel the way that we want.
Great. Thank you. And David?
I'd say the big one is plan for future growth. It's kind of often overlooked, where someone is so focused on the here and now and expectation that this will solve it, but it's really just the beginning. So realize that from the start, and know that we should design it for future growth and have that expectation, and ultimately will save costs in the long term.
Great. Well, thank you for that closing, and thank you to Ben and JR and David for joining us, as well as a thank you to Forth for organizing this webinar, and to the webinar sponsors, Honda and Idaho. And Symbiote, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Cassie. Thank you, JR. Thank you, Ben. And thank you, David, for joining us and presenting. We have the contact information for our panelists here. If you have any additional questions, we will be sending the webinar recap. We will CC our speakers and panelists, so feel free to continue the dialogue there. And we are going to be taking a little break in May for something called the Roadmap Conference. So we hope you can join us June 14th for our final webinar of this season, for Federal Community Grants Program and the Justice 40 Initiative. Join us on Tuesday, June 14, 2023, and then we will announce the remainder of our webinar topics for the fall 2023 season. And while you wait, there is not going to be a lack of programming, because again, roadmap. So we hope to see you all at Roadmap. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. See you in May. Bye, all.